Parenting is hard, but this is easy. Listen to Stroller Coaster, hosted by Lynn Smith, a mom and former news anchor for NBC, and co-hosted by an improv comedian. And it's a place to be entertained and to laugh over crazy parenting moments and to learn something new. Stroller Coaster was voted Best Branded Podcast 2024 by Digiday, and Stroller Coaster is created by Munchkin, the most loved baby lifestyle brands in the world. I just got done listening to their transitions episode and I really resonated with it. And I just loved how they were talking about kids really needing to have that connection piece before we can expect them to follow directions or to transition easily or to get their shoes on, get out of the door, get in the car. I just felt so seen as a toddler mom. And this season, they're talking about things that we really all should be talking about, like how to stay connected with our kids once they're in daycare, how to hold on to your patience as a parent, why kids are so obsessed with snacking, and the hilarious but important process of making friends with other parents. So follow Stroller Coaster on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure you leave them a rating and review. Welcome to No One Told Us, the podcast that tells the truth about parenting and talks about all the stuff you wish you knew before having kids. I'm your host, Rachael, and today I'm speaking with Elise Disher. She's a mom of two little ones, ages 5 and 1, and she brings over 18 years of experience working in the early childhood profession as an educator, teacher, director, and consultant. I am so thrilled to welcome Elise today because this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, of course, as a former educator, but also just as a parent of 3 kids who have been through different childcare settings and schools, and so excited to have your expertise here as we speak about daycares and preschools. So Elise, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
So for anyone who's just not familiar with you, because I know we have a lot of parents who are, still in that baby stage, but might be curious about getting started with looking at preschool daycare. Can you just share a little bit more about your background and kind of what brought you to this space of sharing about this on Instagram as well?
Yeah, so I've been working in early learning settings since I was still a child myself, around 18. I fell into the profession by accident after a failed performing arts career. I soon realised when I left high school that I wasn't, that was not my path, and I needed a job. And then, so for me, I went in just thinking, yep, I'll make some money, and quickly fell in love, and I was absolutely obsessed with what children in the beginning for me was. I was like, oh, there's nothing more intimidating than a toddler who would just, you say hello to them and they just sort of give you this blank stare. I remember going in and just I was shaking reading my first story with them, but I knew straight away that this was something that I would commit my life to. And so then it began, and then I studied and I worked in probably, in many different roles in early learning centres before I started working for a big not-for-profit company, doing more of a consultancy and training and support role for educators, mainly around the importance of relationships with children and how we can embed really quality interactions and safe environments for young children to thrive. And then I got pregnant myself and had my daughter, and I had been focusing so much on relationships and attachment in my everyday work. It just was part of me. And then when I became a mum and I met my mother's group, and I'm down at the play group and everyone's talking about sleep training and just talking about really rigid ways of being with children and what children needed in order to be good at the restaurant or be kind at the playground. And I thought, oh, no one's talking about all of this stuff that I know in early childhood. And that's where I just felt I felt kind of isolated in a way in that sort of new motherhood identity, but also felt a really strong pull to say that there are other ways to think about young children, and there are other ways that we can approach this whole experience. And yeah, so I just started talking about my daughter and learning, and sharing play ideas, and then it sort of evolved from there.
Amazing. And I just love the way you speak about early childhood, because it's really the way it should be. Like, you have such a relational framework, and I know you're trained as well in Circle of Security parenting, which is a program I've been through as well and absolutely love. Yeah, you have this way of speaking about transitioning into childcare or school with that attachment focus, which I think is so lacking, at least here in the US. And I'm curious to hear, because you're in Australia, I'm curious to hear if that's the norm there as well, if you're pushing back against norms where you're from, or is that kind of just the standard practice?
That's a really good starting point, because I think that I still am challenging the norm. I think we still do have this idea of when children start in an early learning setting that we want to get the parents out as quick as possible, with this fear of the child might get too used to you being in the environment, so it's best to just, rip off the Band-Aid. And as much as when I was working in my consultancy role, and I was working with hundreds of sort of centres and advocating for a different way. So even though half the professional body, I would say, in Australia is saying, no, we need to do more than just a standardised approach, even our regulations and our national quality standards that give guidance for professionals, if you actually read those, they are advocating for this relational, soft, drawn out, unique for each family. They're promoting all of that. But what we see in everyday practice and generalized transitions is still time and time again this idea that, yes, we do it from 10 to 11 a.m. You come for 2 or 3 visits. Some centres are still trying to do one. Some centres are still stuck in their COVID days where they're saying, oh, well, actually, we find it better if parents don't come in at all. There's this push and pull with, like, it feels as though there's still 2 teams.
I mean, what are your opinions on, like, the benefits of having parents there, so that maybe parents listening can have some language to go in and say, hey, I'm not sure if this is a policy that you currently hold, but I think it would be something really interesting to explore, and here are the reasons why it's beneficial.
Yeah, everything comes back to the basics of attachment and children's attachment needs that they are born having already set. It's for all children. I think all children will benefit from a tailored sort of transition where parents are really highly involved in the environment, and of course temperament will play into it as well. So you're going to have children that are easier going, and they might be just more that duck to water that we all hope for, but there's many children that won't be like that. So temperament plays into it, but mainly attachment needs. And so what we know about attachment is that so in an early learning environment, our goal is for children to explore and to play and to enjoy the experiences on offer. And we know from attachment that in order for the brain to activate that part of learning, it needs to be in the presence of a safe and secure primary caregiver, because that is what activates exploration. And if we take away that attachment person straight away, we're actually removing safety. And if children aren't feeling safe, then they're not actually getting the benefit of the program. And to be perceived as this safe person takes a little bit of time, right? And so 1 or 2 visits isn't going to, many children's brain is not going to look at that educator and see them as their secure base, their safe haven that they can turn to when things aren't going right, or that they can trust that, oh, my parent is not here and my main caregiver's not here, but I know that you're here and that I can rely on you. That's what we want to focus on. That's what the whole transition and orientation process should be focused on, is transitioning and building this sort of relationship with the educator, that when the parent does start practicing those separations, that the child goes, I have someone else. And 1 or 2 visits is not going to be enough for so many children.
I remember when we were transitioning into preschool, for my first, it was COVID. So it was literally like masks on, drop and run. We were not allowed in his classroom at all. Like, it was really tough. Luckily, he had had some experience with daycare before, so it wasn't totally foreign for him to be without us during the day. But my daughter was much more sensitive to separation because she was my COVID baby. She had never left my side. And they had a policy where parents were welcome to stay all day if we wanted for the first 2 full weeks. And then there were kids who actually needed more than that, and they were willing to accommodate that. And now those kids are there alone and they're totally fine. And it's this thing where it's like, I think it comes from fear, maybe. I don't know if it's fear of the educators and, not wanting too many parents in their space. And I totally get that. But I think there's this fear that if you provide this support and foster this attachment, that it's never going to go away. And it's just so counterintuitive because that's not how kids work. They need to depend first before they can be independent, right? So I'm curious then how you could maybe tell a parent to advocate for something like this, or if it's just absolutely not possible, what are some tips you can share with parents about making that teacher look like a safe person or feel like a safe person, even if they're somebody brand new and you can't have that like overlapping period that you would love to have?
Firstly, I would suggest that you check wherever you are, what the regulations and the guidance that the government or the education body actually provides, because a lot of centres will just make up their own, this is our philosophy, this is our policy. And so if you can use they will be familiar with these documents, even though they'll feel really foreign for you. In my transition guide in Australia context, I provide, this is what the government says, and many families have shared with me, I just printed them off and I used that, and then they became, they were more flexible in what their policy was. So I would say that's definitely a great advocacy piece, is to just check, because hopefully it'll back up this idea of allowing families to spend time in the room. If that is not, if that's not the case where you are, because I know that there'll be people all around the world listening to this, you can simply use this idea of, because mainly I think there's 2 things that happen in early learning centres. There's a fear of the child getting too used to you being there, which will actually make it worse, and which is a misconception, of course. And so if that comes up, or they say that's their reason, you can just talk about this idea of, that's like saying that if I shouldn't spend too much time with my family and my relatives, because then they might get too used to me being there. So when I want to go on date night and they're babysitting, my child will freak out. So I should be managing how much time I spend with my family to protect my child, which just sounds kind of ludicrous when you think about it in that way. So that's a nice one that sometimes families sort of can come back with, and we can do it in a really kind way. And if all else fails and they are just sort of sticking to this 1 or 2 visits, I would first suggest, especially if you've got a child, if your gut's telling you my child is not going to be okay with this, is to explore other options, because really what we want is to find early learning environments where educators understand the importance of relationships and attachment and responsiveness and attunement. And if they have that sort of surface level understanding, then that sort of could be a red flag in itself. I know that's a very, for many people, they're like, the wait list is 3 years long. This is the only centre I can get into. Some strategies for supporting that is to try and make the unfamiliar familiar. And so what we're wanting to do is, when you're in the when you've got your child's in your care, we want to be starting to explore what it might be like. So we can request photos of the key people that will be looking after them, and you can put them on your fridge. Again, in my little guide course thing, I've got like a template where you can get the educator to actually share a photo of themselves, maybe their family, their favourite activity. They can write a little bit about themselves. So then you're bringing that person into your home, and you're able to talk with your child. Oh, you're going to see Rachel, and remember, here she is, and look, this is her dog. She's got a dog named Ollie, and we've got a dog too. And you can sort of make those connections in that sort of visual way. You might do some drive-bys of the centre and talk about what they might do. You can role play at home what it's going to be like to say goodbye. So you could play schools at home, and I'll drop you off and this is how it will go. Visuals of, like a social story or reading books about, this is what it's like to go to an early learning centre. When you do go, when they allow you to go, or even on their website, gathering photos of the environment and bringing them home and looking through them. And then if once you do start, usually you'll have to pay for a whole day, regardless of how long you stay, depending on what sort of provider you're looking at. But keeping the days really short in the beginning to build them up. Yeah.
If it's like a successful 20 minutes, that's so much better than tons of hours that are like just okay, right? You actually made me think of something that I want to ask you when we come back from this quick break. Do we actually need to be sending our kids to childcare if it feels too hard? We'll be right back. We're back with Elise, and you brought up so many great ideas and so many tips. And you also said, it's also maybe an option to seek something else if this isn't working. And that made me just think there are probably a lot of people listening that think they have to do daycare or they have to do some type of early childhood program for socialization or for social skills. Is that true? Is that a misconception? At what age, assuming that the family has a choice, right? Which I know a lot of families, especially here in the US, do not have a choice. They have to use childcare, and that's completely fine. But for those who are maybe on the fence or wondering if it's something they have to do or they should do, what do you have to say about that? Do kids really need to attend childcare very young?
The easiest answer to that is no. Absolutely not. I am a massive advocate for quality early learning environments, and and I know that in the first 3 years especially, staying at home is just as beneficial. And so, I think about it in the context of we all win. So that the parent that has no choice and they're going to work full time and their child is in a high quality early learning environment 5 days a week, the research shows that your child is going to have similar outcomes to a child that's in a nurturing home environment for the first 3 years being cared for by the primary caregiver or family. And so whatever works for you, we can sort of take comfort in this idea that it actually doesn't matter. The outcomes, especially in the first 3 years, are the same. And children and the narrative is, put them in, it's so good for their social skills. The reality is that children learn to be in relationship by being in relationship with their primary caregiver, and you are their first teacher. I know it sounds really cliche, but it's true that we will have the biggest influence on children, and those peer-to-peer, the social peer-to-peer stuff that we're looking for is more influential in the sort of when it comes into primary school years. And even then, if we can maintain a high quality attachment relationship with our kids, then even when they're in primary school, we can still be the strongest influence on their social skills. So thinking about them needing it in the first 3 years when they're still in infancy, absolutely, it's not about social skills.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for answering that so clearly. And one thing you also keep mentioning is quality. So, a quality childcare center. What does that mean to you? What should parents be looking for, assuming that maybe they're starting to just kind of dip their toe in looking for a daycare center or preschool right now?
So what is quality, and how do I speak about this in a way that doesn't then go on in this massive tangent because, special interest of mine.
Okay.
Okay, so when in the research, what they talk about for high quality, so when they're looking at these outcomes for children, firstly, maybe I'll just mention the outcomes. So in the first 3 years, children have very similar learning outcomes when you look at longitudinal studies and what they will, when we look at the child as they grow up, and then we compare whether they were at home or in a long daycare or early learning environment. In the birth to 3 space, it's very similar. Children who might be in a vulnerable home, there is an increase in learning outcomes. So if the home environment isn't one of safety, then it is a great idea, and it's great for children to have access because it can sort of minimise that developmental gap. So that's a positive for early learning. Before 3 years, similar outcomes, we can all take comfort in that. And then after 3, we see in high quality centres that children who attend an early learning program have slightly better outcomes. And look, all research is swayed. And so I'm sure that there's some sort of incentive in trying to find these positive outcomes as well. So we have to hold that in mind. But high quality is really the key. But what they're looking at in the studies is ratios. So how many educators per child, how many children per educator, and the lower the ratio, well, it depends on how you look at it, but the less children to educators is a measure of quality. The room sizes, and so in the early years, sometimes I talk to families and they say, I didn't want to go to that centre because there wasn't many children. It was really small. There was only a couple of rooms, which is a misconception, is that sometimes we're looking for these hustle and bustle and, lots of children everywhere and it's really loud and, there's this positive energy. Of course, we want the positive energy, but we also know that smaller sizes is better for young children, and also this idea of the less transitions, the better. So the less times they have to move a room is actually a good thing, whereas sometimes parents are like, my child's turned 2 now, I want them to go to the toddler room. They're 3, why are they not in 3-year-old kinder? If we go back to relationship, the less times they have to build that trust with someone, the better. So I'm looking at a centre at the moment, and it's a 36-place centre, and they're I think they only move 1 or 2 times depending on what time they start. And so I'm crossing my fingers that when I go there, the people that are there have a really beautiful relationship, because at the end of the day, when I think about quality, it all comes back to, do these people have positive regard for children? Do they enjoy their job? Are they playful? Are they responsive and attuned? And do they prioritise being with children and not being busy all day, or working on focusing too much on displays or art creations or strong academic sort of things? Are they just enjoying being with the children is what I would look at for quality.
I know a lot of parents also kind of worry, especially parents that are, hey, sleepy baby parents. I know they also worry about the sleep piece. So assuming it's for a younger child daycare setting where the children are still napping or it's babies, what's your experience there? Are most providers willing to work with children who need support to sleep, or is that still kind of a big pain point?
I think it actually really depends on the centre. So you want to get a feel for them. If they're a centre that's going to support this relational type of transition into the centre, they're more likely to then adopt what you're doing at home as a way to support children to sleep. I know that here in Australia we have we're very lucky because we do have frameworks and we've got national quality standards that actually outline the expectation to mimic what families are doing at home, and as long as it meets sort of safe sleep standards. So we've got that to back us up to highlight this and say, well, you're actually required to somewhat partner with me on this. And so, yeah, I think it would really depend. But the idea that I think what happens is that families feel the need to conform to the early learning centre because they don't want to be the difficult family, or they think, well, actually that would be really hard to do. And of course it's hard when you're working on here with babies. We have 1 to 4, and yeah, of course it's going to be hard to rock babies to sleep while patting this child, and this child needs this, but you can make it work because they're not all sleeping at the same time. There's many different, and that's what I do for a living, is I support educators to find new ways to meet multiple needs at the same time, or to prioritize how it works. So yeah, I think for families that are thinking about how will my child sleep, there's 2 things. Children will learn a new dance to fall asleep, like this idea of like learning to fall asleep together is like a dance, and that how your child falls asleep with you might be different to how they fall asleep with their caregiver, and that actually is okay as long as it all still aligns with your values and your expectation of your child feeling safe in the process. So I know that the only way I can support my child to have a 15-month-old, he's not 15 months just yet, he's 14 months, I should say, but the only way I can get him to sleep is to boob him to sleep. Yeah. And then when he's with my nanny, she is able to put him down in his cot and he goes to sleep. And I'm like, what do you mean? So they've got their very simple dance that they do. And then Jared has a bit more of a complicated dance that he does with Banks. But it works for them. Yeah, it takes a little longer and there's a little more tears, but he supports those tears and he's responsive and he always gets the job done. And I'm like, how is everyone else able to do this and I'm not? And there's also, especially with the children that are a little bit older, like our little young babies, our young toddlers and toddlers who are still having naps, there is something with, it's a consistent routine. An early learning environment is always, it's developed for children. And so there isn't all those wobbly things that happen in our everyday life, like, oh, I've got to quickly run to the supermarket to get this, so I've interrupted nap, or Auntie Jo has come over for a visit, so now nap is. In an early learning environment, it's so consistent, and the children will also just follow suit with what the other children are doing. There is merit in that. They do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I remember doing tours and parents coming in and going, how have you got 20 toddlers in this room? And most of them are having a nap while other children are playing. Like, this doesn't make any sense. And I just shrug my shoulders. I'm like, I don't know. It's just what they do.
It's true. I hear from parents all the time who say, my kid naps so great at daycare, they will not nap for me. And yeah, I mean, the opposite definitely happens too. But 9 times out of 10, I hear about naps and sleep going so much better at daycare than parents were ready for or that they were expecting. So a lot of times it's lots of worry for nothing. One more quick break, and when we come back, I would love to hear your thoughts about some of the typical behaviors we might see at preschool or daycare and how you handle those. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back with Elise, and one other thing that I think comes up for parents a lot with choosing daycare or, getting their kids settled into a preschool is some of those trickier behaviors that might start to come up. Things like kids not sharing or getting super dysregulated or having meltdowns. I know so many of us feel so alone in these things, and I promise you're not alone, but maybe if they hear it from you, they'll believe that it's very typical for kids to act that way when they're so young. So what can you tell us about, those dysregulated moments? What are some words of wisdom that you can share with the parents?
Yes, you are not alone. I'm quite humbled having a 5.5-year-old that still has huge emotions, and I'm like, oh, okay, yep, this is how we roll. So it's important to remember, like, in those big moments of where it all feels like it's, you know, they've completely lost it. It's important to remember that there's actually not that much that we can do. So if it feels like it's not working, if you're like trying to discipline in that moment, or you're trying to redirect the behavior in some way, or you're trying to be, you know, trying to inject a little fun into it to try and change the mood, there's actually, if you're failing in that space, it's because it's not that they can't hear you, but their body is not hearing you, because they're that part of the brain that can rationalize, the thinking brain, it's completely offline. They're being highly driven in those moments where they've lost it. They actually have lost it. They've lost the thinking brain. It's detached from the circuitry of like the emotional brain, and they're being driven by this primitive state. So the emotions are going to override any strategy you do. So the lens that we can look at in those really, really tricky moments is my role here as the adult is to create safety, emotional safety and physical safety. So I'm going to make sure my child's safe, I'm safe, the children around them are safe. So I'm going to remove any dangers physically, and then I'm going to create the emotional safety by having the lens of my child feels really unsafe in this moment. If we can think about them going, in this moment, my child has left the building and they're in their danger room, they're in the emergency room, and they're sort of being driven by that fight, flight, or freeze response, then our approach to it is, I need to take them from the danger room back into the safety room. Well, how do I do that? I create safety myself by, you know, trying to be that calm person and work on that co-regulation and the being in the moment rather than trying to do too much. It's sort of this idea of do less, focus on being emotionally safe for the child.
Sometimes we try to address it, or like we would just want them to be quiet or calm down as soon as possible, and we just escalate it further sometimes.
Yeah. And look, sometimes we don't have time to just sit with and be with a massive tantrum either. So we have to find times to reiterate to our children that we can be that we can hold space for them. And then also at times we need to let them know that we are able to take the lead in difficult moments. And, you know, it might be that we have to scoop them up and get them to the car and do the being with back at the car. Or, you know, it's easier said than done. What I like to think about when I think about meltdowns and tantrums is like, it's like a wave. And so we know with a wave that it's going to peak and it's going to crash and it's going to get really, really messy. And then what we also know is that it then calms as it comes into the shore. And so what is happening right now will pass, and we can ride the wave with our child, and we can accept and expect that these are going to happen, and picture ourselves sort of cruising on that surfboard, rather than when we use teaching techniques or we're trying to fix it or we're trying to discipline it. It's like getting your surfboard and just holding it up against the wave and trying to push against it, and it just makes it all worse, and then you both feel like you're drowning.
I love that you're Australian and you just gave a surfing analogy. That's perfect.
Yeah, I surf every weekend, you know. No, I don't.
No, I love that. And I often kind of visualize that same thing of just like riding the wave, just getting through it. And 9 times out of 10, it just calms down so much more quickly on its own. You've mentioned a lot of circle of security parenting terms too, like the being with and the, you know, exploration and the secure base or the safe space. Can you tell us just a little bit about circle of security and what that means? Because I know you also, I think you run groups, right?
Yeah, I do. I have the privilege of running Circle of Security also now in classrooms and for educators, which I think just really changes the narrative and shifts it just shifts the identity of what it means to be an early childhood educator. And that is just like amazing work. And I also offer the course for families. So circle of security is this idea that children need two things in order to thrive and survive. They need to be able to explore their world and have someone watch over them, and to support their exploration and to be seen as a secure base. And then on the other hand, they also need someone to turn to when things get a bit tricky, and someone to welcome them and be their safe haven, to help them to organise their feelings, to provide comfort and protection. And the circle of security really creates a really simple way to look at this coming and going in relationship, to look at a child as either being in those one of two modes. In, I need to explore my world in order to learn to be safe in it, and I need you to be good at allowing me to do that. And on the other hand, in order to be safe in the world, I need a more mature person to keep me safe and protect me and to comfort me and to figure these tricky moments of life out with me. And the adult needs to kind of be good at that as well. And the circle of security helps us to see what's going on for our children in those two modes and what it is that we should do to attune and respond to that. And also what's going on for us. When children are doing what they naturally do, yet our body is telling you that, it's triggering us or it's making us feel like really uncomfortable. It really works on tuning into why am I reacting in this way when my child goes off and when they come back and they're whining or they're behaving in a way that, is really irritating. It really tunes into that and builds sort of conscious awareness to be able to be there and, as you said, be with in a more regulated way.
Yeah, I found it more helpful than any therapy I've ever done as far as my relationships with my kids and my parenting. It was so incredibly life-changing. I recommend the book to everybody. My husband's actually reading it right now, Raising a Secure Child. And yeah, the program is incredible. So I'm going to put your link in the show notes. So if anybody's interested in going through the program with you, they can check it out. I highly, highly, highly recommend. It's the absolute best. And it's fun because you get to do it with a group of parents too. So just a little plug for you there, because I would love to run the program myself someday. I just have to carve out some time, but it really is life-changing. Elise, thank you so much for your expertise on this topic. I know so many parents worry about this, and I hope that you've shed some light and made it sound a little bit more doable and a little bit less scary. I have one last question for you, which is, what is something no one told you before you became a parent that you wish you knew?
I thought about this question a lot. And what I came back to is, I thought about it a lot because there's this one thing that keeps coming up for me that I already kind of knew, but maybe I didn't really truly believe it, is this idea that your child is born a whole person. And it actually doesn't matter if you do everything by the book or, you think it's not that much about us. We need to sometimes take the ego out of it and realize that our person is a whole being, and who they are is they're born with that, and it's our role to really celebrate who they are as an individual and realize that, for instance, you can provide all the right ways of introducing foods and introducing messy play so your child, is really accepting of this, that, and whatever. And I did all of this stuff to ensure that my daughter wouldn't be the child that didn't want to put their finger in the paint, or that they wouldn't be bothered by, they would be. I just pictured her like in mud pits with mud all over her face, and she's so far from that human, and I did all the things right, and that was really humbling for me. So just realizing that it's not so much about us. Our children are amazing, and if we can tune in and celebrate who they are, then it just makes parenting just that little bit more rewarding. And
I love that so much. That's such good advice. And for anybody that doesn't believe that, just have another kid. And you will see
Exactly.
What we do, really, they are fully on their own agenda because, Yeah, my first two kids and my third could not be different. And we did a lot the exact same, and we did a lot differently too, but you're right. They're just born into the world, their own people. Thank you so much again for joining us. I will put all of your amazing resources in the show notes. I know you have some resources about what we had discussed. Where can people find all of this stuff? Where can they find you if they want to connect on social media?
The best place to find me is on my Instagram account, elisedisher.ed, and I'm the founder of You Me Play. So my website is actually the letters U, the letter U, me, play.com.au. So you'll find some resources there as well. But yeah, the Instagram page is where I'm at.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to see you in face to face.
I know, it was so fun.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.